what you do. Tell me your favorite newsletter right now, and tell me what email products look like at The Skim.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everybody. I'm Deirdre. I am head of product at The Skim. And our caveat is that we're not allowed to say each other's email newsletters, so obviously I read all of them, and they're fantastic. I'm going to cheat and say two. So one, I'm a big sports fan. I used to work at ESPN, so I think there's this huge open space for more and better sports newsletters. There's one that came out recently called Sports Internet by Kendall Baker that I am just obsessed with. Great voice, great way to get my rundown every single morning, and then I'll probably steal yours a little bit too. Stratechery is just a daily read. And then email at The Skim. So we started email first, but what I like to say is that we didn't start as an email newsletter company. We started as an audience-obsessed routine company. Sounds buzzwordy, but I promise it's not. What that means is we looked at our audience, female millennials, and we said, how do we integrate content and information into their routine in a way that felt seamless and just part of their day? And obviously, what do they do? The first thing they wake up in the morning is check their email. So we started out with our email newsletter, the Daily Skim, and it has now grown to over 7 million daily readers, and overall has been just a huge driver of success for the company and engagement for the company. We see it as the intro to all the things the Skim has to offer and a way to hook them in a very, very intimate way. So more to come on that as we kind of go down other topics, but obviously a very important piece of what the Skim offers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roy Schwartz. I'm one of the founders of Axios. Before I was at Axios, I was also at Politico, and that's where the three co-founders came from. You stole my thunder on the newsletter piece. We have over a dozen newsletters, so by the time I get through all of those, I don't have much time, but I do like Stratechery. It comes out a couple of times a week.
Awesome. So my job is managing the emails at Quartz. That basically means the day-to-day production of them, launching new features, maintaining the ones that exist, and sort of monitoring the growth and the health of the subscriber list, so to speak. And actually, right now, I'm really enjoying the UX Collective, which is a really random design email that's weekly. Please check it out. It's very good. I don't know how I found it, but it arrived in my inbox, and I didn't unsubscribe. All right, cool. So tell me about, from your perspective and your experience, what is the sort of distinction between an email product and every other product, a site, an app, a bot? Like, what makes an email a product? In your perspective?
So first of all, I love that we're saying email as a product. I think the biggest shift that has started to happen, which is great, is that email is no longer just a marketing tool towards your products. It actually is your product and can be a cornerstone of your product strategy. But what makes email a special product is, I believe, like fundamentally the intimacy that it has with the reader and the audience. We talk a lot about, again, how the Daily Skim wasn't just an email newsletter that popped up in your inbox. It built this very intimate relationship that built this habit and this routine. When I started at the company and started talking to users, it was kind of beautiful. I would get on the phone with them and they would say that, yeah, I wake up, I brush my teeth, I drink my coffee, I read my Skim, I go to work. And it was just immediately this like cornerstone of their morning routine in a way that was so seamless and so hard to create and build with other platforms. And so I think that's what makes it so special. It's also what makes it very easy to screw up, as we'll talk about. But it is this very intimate way to connect with your readers and on a one-on-one relationship.
The engagement that people feel around newsletters is really unbelievable. People will tell me stories about how they can barely open their eyes, and the first thing they read is Axios AM, because they want to know like how their day is going to unfold. A lot of what we cover is essential reading for influencers, so it's people in government, people who are running companies, and so what is written in that note could really drastically alter how their day unfolds. And they do feel a connection directly to the writer, which is another thing I would say makes this product very unique and sort of has its unique advantages and challenges. People will talk about and feel like they know the writer in a very intimate way. And I've been around our writers, whether it's Mike Allen or Dan Primack, and after events, people will come up to them. And it's almost like what you see with stars that you might see on TV or in the movies. They're like, oh, they are having this daily conversation with them, so they feel like they know them. And so they come up and they're like lost long friends, which is like very funny when they don't know each other.
Yes.
But it really is great. And the best newsletter writers are the ones that feel that sense of community on their side. And I found over the years that people that think about their audience and their promise to their audience in terms of what content they're sharing, those are the best writers because they feel connection to their audience really directly.
Yeah. And not to go on too much of a tangent, but I would add that the success that we saw with email as our first and core product really built a product philosophy that has lasted with us through the years, and that every platform we build on and move into needs to have that level of intimacy and routine-based behavior. So the next product we built was a calendar. We're very invested in audio. These are all these different formats that mirror the intimacy that email has, and it can be very, very different from a typical strategy that you see today.
I love it. You guys are killing it. So love the routine, definitely like correlates with some of Quartz's philosophy around this. I think one thing, language that we use for email specifically is push. So it's a push product in our newsroom. The people that work on it are push editors. And so this whole motion of pushing something to a user is actually really important to think about as editorial and as product, because it gives actually us as the caterer of news, the control and the cadence in the success of that delivery. And so there's like a responsibility in that word. And there's also this assumption where like we are obligated to do a good job because this is kind of like a one-shot thing. You can't take that email back once it gets out there. And then another key part of how we look at email specifically at Quartz is that the writing a story on our site is not the same writing as writing an email. And that's something that's a continuing, continuously we advocate for that on both sides of the company in editorial and product, where when someone wants to write an email, it's really exciting, and we try and it's actually a whole other skill set, and how exciting is that you get to learn it? Some people run away, and some people are really excited. But the whole idea that the design packaging and the way in which you're experiencing it as a reader should complement the actual editorial content that's in there. And so our emails have a very different design experience for that reason. The story that it's telling has to work with the design and vice versa. And so this is not like us sticking a story that was one place in a bot into an email that's not what we would say is like an honest thing to do for like the thing we want to push to people. And so that's how we've been sort of viewing it, and I think it's going well.
I would say that's the thing that I think when I look at other newsletters, that's the thing people get wrong all the time. Like you can't just take any story, slightly reformat it, and put it in a newsletter. It really does not work that way, and when people get that, that's when you see your open rates start to plummet. Because our audiences are very savvy. They've either read it on the site or they've consumed it in some other way. And the moment you take away that intimacy or that uniqueness that they feel like that product was created just for them at that moment in time, that's when you see things go poorly.
Yeah. And so much of that is contextualizing, where somebody is and what they're experiencing when they're reading your email, because again, email is so intimate. It's thinking about, what is the moment in time in which they're opening your email? What are they looking for? What is the best way to engage with them? We like to say that there's like this bifurcation between the way people look at their inbox, and this is even in like a split-second scan, where they literally will just auto-segment, their friend emails from their like brand promotion emails, and that just happens just automatically. And you want to push to be in that first one. And so that's anything from the voice, the actual written content. We think about the design a lot too. We try to minimize images in there. We try to make sure you don't have to click out too much. We want it to really feel like something that was written by your friend and not another one of those promotional emails you're just going to swipe away.
Yeah. And what do you guys do when you get in the situation where it's like, okay, we've got stories and we need clicks on these stories, and email could be a way to get these clicks? That's a question that I have in front of myself like almost every day, and it's like the eternal tension between we want people to get clicks on these stories for editorial, but we also don't want to deliver a shitty email at the same time. And so how have you guys like felt that tension, or a different tension where you're trying to like keep integrity in this quality email?
Yeah, it's tough. I think one, relentless prioritization and focus around what the value of your email is doing is extremely important. It is so easy to just make small concessions and bastardize things, to be honest. And then it's hard to actually measure the long-lasting impact that that has. And so you do have to be very, very focused around what you're actually trying to accomplish with this email and not bastardize that. So the way we try to think about it, though again, we definitely face challenges, is that, what is the overall flow of somebody waking up in the morning and needing to get value out of this thing? And first and foremost, that means that they should be able to get their news content and their news rundown without having to click out. And then from there, maybe we can offer some things to do next, which is fine, because once they click out, they're never gonna come back. But it shouldn't kind of hurt the core flow of that news briefing that they're getting from us every morning.
I mean, one of our philosophies is that it has to be reader first. Everything we do is reader first. And so we don't do that. So if we have a click out, to your point, it's something around going deeper on a particular topic, but our newsletters are very self-contained. Yes, like it is the product, and there is no sort of driving it to some other product.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's important. You can do, we've played around with products that are meant to push back, but I would never mix those two things together. I think you're either creating a product that is meant to be standalone that you can read and self-contained, or you have something that is more of a in case you missed it type product, which can be helpful. We do one at the end of the day so that people who've been in meetings all day long can be like, oh, well, what were the top 5 things for them to get caught up on? But that is a self-contained product. It is not meant to be something that you go to and then you're surprised by a link. You know that's what you're getting.
Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. I had this experience where we were launching a special project called How We'll Win, and we saw an opportunity for a community to be built. And in courts, we do associate email with community, and so it became an obvious conversation, does this deserve an email? What would that look like? And very quickly, we had to address, like, what is the point? Because building community is a very big goal. It might happen naturally, it might not. We want these people to live somewhere, but what do we really mean when we say that, and all these kind of questions. And we settled, and I think it really helped us in the long run, and we all agreed that the point of this, push is to actually lead people back to the online series, and that's an okay goal as long as it's communicated, and we've all agreed, so that at the end, when we all want data on this and we want to say, were we successful, we can say, well, actually, were there clicks on this? Because opens don't actually matter in this specific project, and that's okay. We don't have to do opens because that's like a hyped thing, because we actually reached the thing we were all agreeing on getting to. So there's definitely, I agree, like a time and place, but there is this conversation that is constantly happening, at least in my email world, that is fun.
And I love these examples because it does come back to saying you have to set an expectation with your users and then make sure you're meeting that expectation. You're not screwing up that expectation. So, because ultimately you're trying to build trust, and email is a very, very powerful way to build that trust, but also screw up that trust. So if you have a product that is meant to give somebody a rundown, not make them leave anything and move on with their day, that is the value you're trying to drive, and you can't mess with that core value. If you have another product that is actually meant to catch them up on the different things they might have missed and click out to different ththings, and that is also great. And it is really making sure your whole organization is aligned around the purpose of each of these things.
Yeah. Let's talk about when we screw up. Because it's so permanent in email. Tell me an example of a time where you were like, I want to take it back, or you missed something. Because cadence of an email is really important, especially in this routine, especially that I observed from the scam, which is at a certain day, it's like my body knows, it's like muscle memory, right? This is coming to me. And so tell me about how we come back from when we mess up.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is email can be also the most frustrating thing to work on for engineering and product and design teams or editorial teams, because you can't take it back. It goes out and it's permanent, and it is so stressful. So we have definitely screwed up, luckily not as much as we could have, but there have been moments where we've double sent the email, where it's been late, and I think every time that has happened, again, gladly that it hasn't happened too often, but when it has happened, we kind of took a step back and we were like, you know what? The whole point of this is that we feel like we're building this human relationship with our audience. So let's just talk to them as if, hey, sorry, we screwed up. So I think for one of our dual sends, we sent out an email saying, sorry, we missed our coffee this morning. We screwed up. Like, please take us back, for people who might have unsubscribed. Or we kind of try to really acknowledge it. We actually did a third send, yeah, because we were like, we're so sorry.
That's when you do
Yeah.
that. That's an interesting internal conversation. You're like, do you do
another
third
one.
send?
Yeah, and it actually had extremely high engagement. We had so many people writing back in saying, we love you, Skim, don't worry, it happens to us too. And it actually ended up being this huge kind of like engagement driver. And I do think you just have to kind of take a step back and acknowledge that this is a human relationship, and whatever type of screw up it is actually sometimes an opportunity to build your brand and build that kind of footing even more.
Yeah, look, it's email mistakes are going to happen. We do a ton of test sends before it goes out. I'm sure everyone does, but for those who are going to start something, I would highly recommend setting that up. So we kind of go through the whole thing, and we'll have at least one, if not 2 or 3 test sends. And we do that a lot when we're testing things that we're going to link to, or images, or we do a lot of animated GIFs. And you want to make sure that all of those animations work, because people get very frustrated when there's that type of broken link or an animated GIF that isn't quite working.
Yeah, I am constantly in touch with how archaic email is as a system. And one thing that, it's not necessarily a screw up, but it's something that I have to explain to users. So if they're emailing in and they're like, I'm not getting any more, who unsubscribed me? This is like, who did this to me? How did this happen? And I try to explain that, like, in email world, if Eva at QZ forwards Deirdre at the Skim a course email, and Deirdre is like, I don't want this junk, and she hits unsubscribe, that email is attached to Eva at QZ, and so she has just unsubscribed me, right? So there are all these architectural, archaic things that we would have higher expectations for something on like a browser or an app where we feel like more in control. And so those are things where we haven't necessarily screwed up, but sometimes we screw up in being able to explain it and like advocate that, okay, this system can be difficult and we don't always have the answers, but like it's worth it, like stay with us. I'm actually very impressed in our obsession email, it's all editorial, the way that there's so many facts in that email, like it's overwhelming. And we have people all day being like, actually, I found 5 new sources and like the information's already old, and they're like all the time talking to us, and we'll put corrections in if we really have gotten it wrong. And the way in which we put in a correction is so clever that it makes you like us a little bit more and not be like they're so sloppy. And so I thought that was a very creative thing that was really a result of an editorial person just like constantly like me sticking them in rooms with product people and like forcing them to think like a product person, and this like idea of recovering and just like rethinking, and that whole cycle became really handy. But yeah, not being able to take an email back is like a pretty horrifying feeling, but it happens.
I think related to that too, we answer every single email that comes into our inboxes. Either personally from the founders sometimes, honestly, but also from our writers. And we have kind of dedicated support on the product team to kind of think through the feedback and kind of summarize it for future improvements. But that has actually been a pillar since day one. I believe when Carly and Danielle started the Skim, the 2 of them were personally responding to every single write-in, and that has carried through to today. And that actually, again, is a really cool opportunity to build that relationship. People are often so shocked because they'll just hit reply to the email and it's like fire off some thoughts, and they don't realize that there is a human on the other end who's actually gonna sit there and respond to them. And you get into these really great conversations with people in the audience, and don't underestimate the kind of minutia of that and how much that can be a value driver.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're gonna talk about innovation, which is like the key word that got you all in the room. Okay, so what does it look like in your team? It could be passive engagement. It could be, innovation. It could be active. We can look beyond what we think this word means. And how are you keeping people engaged? Because that to me is really the innovation question.
Yeah, so I think big thing for us was evolving it as a platform and evolving the capabilities that we have around the email, because it's easy to say, this is an archaic medium, and we're just going to do the bare bones and sort of call it a day. But we built a pretty robust targeting infrastructure for the email, where each section can be segmented, we can target different parts of our audience, we can test things, and actually democratize those capabilities, so anybody across the organization, especially editorial, can think about ways to test and try new things. And I think that's huge because, again, this is such an intimate part of somebody's day, and it can be such a huge driver of success for your organization overall and all of its products, that really trying out new things and testing them and running controls or running control groups and really figuring out what's going to move the needle and what's not can give you some real answers, especially because metrics in email, as we'll talk about later, can be very, very minimal. So I think overall, just a culture of experimentation around email is often not thought about because of the perceived lack of sophistication, when actually you can do it. And I think we've done some really cool stuff that I'm pretty proud of. So there's that. I think the second bucket for me is also kind of taking a step back and thinking about, this is somebody's morning routine. This is part of their day. How can we think about innovating with all the other parts of their morning? So, right now we're giving you the news. Like, what else do you want? And can we do cool personalization options there? Can we try out new things to kind of connect you to a new part of your day? We are thinking a lot about how to innovate within that kind of morning routine concept to kind of build more of the footholds in that moment that we have in that day.
Since launch, we were obsessed with efficiency for the reader. So, one of our philosophies is, I mentioned reader first. The other one is really about smart brevity and efficiency for whoever is consuming our content. So we really became obsessed with the design of the newsletter itself. And so we always try and make innovation around that. And like, is it the simplest and easiest and most consumable version of the content that we can create? So that's something that we've been really focused on. Because we provide news and information, we'll think about graphs or infographics that we can share using animated GIFs sometimes, so that we can, if we can explain it in a visual and not have to write it up, that's the ideal way. So I think when we think about innovation, we think about it, I think, in terms of new content that we can provide, and then we think about it in terms of the way in which it's delivered. Is it as efficient as possible, and is the reader getting out of it exactly what they want without the burden of having to scroll too far or have too many clicks or whatever it may be that is slowing them down in any way?
I love that. You guys took all the great answers. There's one thing that I've noticed in the Court's Obsession email. I don't know if you read it. It's this deep dive every day into a random corner of the global economy. And the email is really creative in the sense that it will take one topic, a new one every day, and the way in which they reach that topic is an incredibly innovative process. I'm going to use an example of this email called Blaming Ambien. Like the drug Ambien. And I'm like, blaming Ambien, what in the world? How is this a topic? And they creatively took the whole fiasco of Roseanne writing that racist tweet and then recovering by saying I had taken Ambien, and then they had taken in Elon Musk's historical tweets of also talking about Ambien, and they basically turned it into a story about what happens to our body when we take Ambien and fail to fall asleep. And I was like, whoa, that is creative. And it might not be technically something that was new and exciting, but to someone like me who's just opening it to learn something, that was a very innovative way to think about a story. And it worked in the specific format that it existed in. And so that to me was we did it. And then we do go.
I'll just add one more thing too, is even on the technical front, Google and AMP, and I know it's very early, but AMP for email could be the next coolest thing that's ever happened to all of us. And I know it will be a long haul, especially because not all the clients are going to come up to speed with it, but we are very excited about the opportunity to create more interactivity in emails. And it's very exciting to see Google actually thinking about investing in that and piloting that. So, I don't think email in its current form and the potential lack of sophistication is going to be long, hopefully.
Yeah, we have a few interactive components in the Obsession email, and as a product manager, something that's difficult for me, as exciting as it is is that because different email clients react differently to this kind of behavior, it creates something like almost unsustainable as far as like, you have to almost choose like, all right, who am I gonna fix it for today? Like, if this solution's gonna affect Apple Mail differently than it's gonna affect Yahoo, and do I care about Yahoo? I don't know, I don't remember how many users we have in Yahoo, and all these things. And so, yeah, it's definitely like a whole world in which a whole world that you could go into. I'm just learning about kinetic email in like a very real way now. But I'm also noticing that with readers who like talk to us through our little prompts and everything, they don't really talk about the poll and quiz. I think it's like a really like sexy thing to have, but they don't say like, I don't know, they don't reference it, and I'm wondering why. I haven't really explored that question, but it's a question that's come up, like, okay, like, we like it as the creators, we're very proud, but is that something that people are actually using? Is it something they like to brag about to their friends? Like, what is the purpose of that specific module? It's a very granular question, but it will lead you to innovation questions about, like, is there a better solution? Do we remove it? Or, like, you know, questions like that. Cool. All right. Okay, so let's talk about loyalty and metrics. I group those two things together. You don't have to. But how do you define success in your email space? And how do you communicate that kind of understanding about metrics to other people in your company?
Yeah, I think something that we are big on is it is, especially given that, you know, email is not, you know, as robust as, you know, web or apps. It's very easy to just care about top line, almost, I call them vanity metrics to an extent, like open rate, list size, things like that. And those are, yes, top line metrics are always important, but when you're talking about internally measuring success and actually tracking yourselves against things, you have to be very, very careful about how you think about these numbers and segment them properly to make sure that you're looking at the right things. So for example, top line open rate really doesn't mean anything to me. It is almost the same thing to me as MAUs. Like, cool, it's like a very high level number, no idea how to track kind of week to week development and success against that, versus something like how are your average daily openers going, increasing or decreasing over time? What about weekly openers? What about your percentage of subs that are disengaging? We actually segment our audience into kind of different engagement buckets and tiers and think about how we can kind of move them up levels of engagement and track them over time. And so especially because email, you have email addresses, you're able to look at things a lot more robustly on the user level. Doing that level of analysis is extremely important. Otherwise, you might be just latching onto things that actually don't really mean anything. So at the first and foremost, I'd really suggest looking at your list size and understanding what you're seeing in terms of weekly and daily engagement across the board. So which percentage of your audience is actually opening this thing every single day, or your top line, or your top subs, versus what subs are maybe opening kind of once or twice a month. We call them like disengaging or fading, probably prone to unsubscribe, who's in the middle, and kind of what are the engagement, what are the drivers of that kind of overall metric. So for example, is it click-through rates? Is it kind of, you know, just overall engagement day over day? Really doing that user level segmentation is the most important thing that I think you can do. And then lastly, what we actually start to do too is look about loyalty beyond email, and think about how are we looking at things at the user level across multiple platforms, and again, thinking about how somebody is engaging with us as a brand overall and holistically, and email is obviously a huge driver of that. And again, it's just so important to look at that stuff versus just kind of top line fleeting KPIs, because that stuff can just be a poor metric of what you're actually seeing and doing.
I would echo everything you said. The thing that we also look at is when we send reader surveys, you know, what's the response rate? And I remember we sent one out when we had, at the time, maybe 80,000 subscribers, and we had 15,000 responses. And people had taken the time to write in, and I think half the people had written in responses. And so that kind of gives you a sense of the level of engagement that newsletters can get. And so I would pay attention to those things. The other things that we do is look at the interaction between our newsletters, because we have now over a dozen different newsletters, so how are people consuming amongst those different newsletters? And then in addition to that, to your point, how are they interacting with other things? We do live events, we do video, we have our site, we're soon gonna have an HBO show. How can we measure the interaction between that audience and everything else we do?
That's awesome. How do you guys use your other avenues and other products to grow the email? Like, what's an example of a strategy that you would use to do that?
Yeah, I think for us, to be honest, the biggest driver of growth for our newsletter has been our referral program and the Skim Ambassador community. And that's just organic marketing tactics, which have been so awesome, and kind of just incentivizing people who love the product to continue to contribute to its success in a lot of ways. So share it with your friends, bring people into this like special circle that we have. And that it just has, over time, just been the biggest driver of success for us. We do paid marketing and things like that. We haven't, for us, again, the email is kind of like the entry point to the Skim, so we aren't really necessarily using our other products as much to kind of funnel people back into it. We have done things on social and stuff like that, but we do tend to find that, kind of that organic marketing tactic is the key for us.
Yeah, we use the events that we do TV appearances when we break news. And nearly all the time when we do those things, our partners will put something up that says sign up at Axios.com, and so that tends to be very helpful. We find that breaking news for us is one of the biggest drivers, so there'll always be a bump that we will pay attention to, whether it's, Google is featuring it or you get something on referral traffic coming in, and then all of a sudden you get signups related to that. So all of those things, I think, are important. When we do events, we try and really, as part of the registration process, when you sign up for an event, when you're there at the event, try and make sure that people understand that that's just one dimension of what we offer, and that for the best experience, you really want that 360 approach.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I am part of doing at Quartz, inherited this sort of strategy, which was called pop-up emails. And so we don't actually throw our own events. We have presence at specific events, but what we actually do is have these like 3 to 5 day emails, which the goal is to build a list around a specific conference or event, like South by Southwest or Davos or Cannes, and we send reporters there, and we have them write about this event. So that people who aren't there can feel like they're there. And it's this very like exclusive, elite kind of feeling where I can be there from home. And so we've been doing this for a couple years. This year we did like the most pop-ups, and it's actually a really successful way to introduce the true concept of the daily brief without having people commit to it like every single day for the rest of their lives. And so that's one thing that I would totally recommend you thinking about. The daily brief is the only one we've done it for so far, but there's a lot of like strategy decisions that happen, like which conference do you choose? Are the people that you're targeting actually going to that conference, or are they at least following it? And is it important for you to have on-the-ground reporting? Is it actually not important? Could you write an email that's all curated content from people that are there, but your reporters aren't there? Like, you could really think about it in more ways than just how we do it. But that's one thing that I would say really helps with growth.
And then one thing we've been playing around a lot with, which is tangential to what you asked, but is how to kind of better connect and create a seamless user experience between our products, which is hard because, again, kind of goes opposite of what we said in the beginning, but because bouncing people out and shifting around between user experiences, it can be very jarring. So we've been testing and experimenting with it. But for example, for our premium subscribers, they not only get the email, but they have this calendar feature. They also get premium audio deep dives on different topics. So we'll run tests with the email where, we'll write about, let's say, the latest in Facebook, and we will deep link you to the app directly to the audio kind of deep dive on the history of Facebook and kind of how we got here, and also let you add an event to your calendar for when Zuckerberg is testifying in front of Congress. And so we are trying to create these kind of like mini ecosystems, if you will, without being too disruptive, but really trying to drive value for people who are engaging across multiple products. And it's fun. I think, deep linking is super interesting, especially if you do have like that native app experience. And, so far, so good. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Okay, are we ready for questions? I feel like we should start sooner than later, because I think you guys probably have good ones. So we will open it up. There is a mic right at on this aisle here. All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, I'm John Henderson from Microsoft News. I was wondering if you'd just talk a little bit about your business strategy. Is this about monetization? Is it about marketing? Somewhere in the middle?
Who wants to go?
Sure,
Roy?
I'll start. We've always monetized our newsletters. It's obviously like a big source of revenue for us. We think very carefully before launching a newsletter whether or not there's going to be interest in that newsletter. Editorially is our number one thing, but we do think about whether or not it's going to be a commercial success as well in terms of will there be sponsorship of that type of content in order to be able to maintain it.
Yeah. Similar, I think, we overall have 4 revenue streams for email specifically. We integrate advertising, and then we also do a lot of affiliate opportunities. So biggest thing for us is books. We recommend books in the newsletter. We are the #1 way to drive female millennials to purchase a book, and have jumped authors an average of like 3,000 spots on the Amazon bestseller list. And so those are kind of our 2 key monetization areas for the newsletter. Overall, I think a lot of our success has been this kind of how do we integrate brands in a unique way, in a way that feels organic and natural to the reader and not jarring. Always a challenge, but we do a lot of like kind of custom illustration work at the top of the newsletter where we find like a great kind of fun way to integrate the brand and the Skims brand, and are kind of always playing around with those opportunities.
Yeah, there's sponsorships in all of our emails. And one way we look at emails as making us money long-term, is that something, like, we truly believe the most loyal people are in that subscriber list. And one kind of experiment we ran was we wrote a book, Quartz wrote a book, and it's called The 10 Objects That, the 10 Objects. And the people who bought this book were the Daily Brief subscribers mostly. And so that just sort of spoke to, okay, like we can touch these people and there is money that they want to give us, and like how can we provide a way for them to give it to us? And so that's sort of how we're thinking about monetizing for email.
Hi. I'm just wondering if any of you have had experience with an occasional newsletter. I was a consultant. When I used to be at the LA Times, sometimes the event staff would take over the emails and send blasts to get people to go to events. And I don't know if that's
Favorite.
a problem any of you have. Hopefully it's not a problem anymore. But anyway, as a consultant, I had a small client start a quarterly, give an option for a quarterly newsletter, and then more often, whenever something interesting happened. And it turned out that the quarterly thing ended up being like a best of. And someone decided to send it to everybody. So it was just a repeat of things. This is obviously a niche, this is not a hard news thing, so that's features and it turned out to be extremely popular, highest open rate among the loyal people who supposedly saw all this stuff already. And I just wonder if you've ever heard of that, or if you've ever done occasional, or had any success with giving an option for people to get it less often than weekly or daily. It would be I'm just curious if you even had monthly.
We do pop up, sort of what Quartz described, but nearly every one of our newsletters is daily or at least once a week. And we tend to find that if we can get more frequency, we gain more loyalty. So at least for us, when we move from a once a week to a twice a week product, open rates go up. And if
This was a separate option. But.
Yeah, well, we've never done anything like that where it's a quarterly email.
Yeah.
We do one, but we do a quarterly trends report, but we send it to everyone who subscribes to our main newsletter. So I don't have anything to compare it to because it's automatically sent to whoever subscribes to AM.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't tried anything like that. We've been honestly extremely protective of just hitting the expectation that they have and not throwing anything else additional to that. I do think there's an opportunity to sort of surprise and delight. It does not surprise me that email got high engagement. I think anytime you have one of those like rundown, I think of like all of the year in review type content that's like a huge hit end of the year. Anytime you have that type of kind of surprise and delight moment is awesome. I think we'd be super open to trying it. We've just been extremely protective of that daily habit and kind of making sure we stick to that.
Yeah, I think that's like, to me, short-term success. And like, is your experiment a 3-month, are we analyzing this between this date and this date? Because like open rates are gonna change over time. And so like, I'd say if you are trying to decide if this was a good idea or not, like this was the begin date, this is the end date, this is the data we're looking at. And if it was a short-term success, that was a yes. And what would this look like long-term, that's a different answer. That's how I would look. I've never had to deal with something like that. But if I had to, those are the questions I would ask.
Hi. I was really interested when you talked about how self-contained your newsletters are. And I was just wondering if there's ever any tension to try to drive more traffic to your articles, back to your website, or if there's a clear understanding that this email is its own product. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I guess I could start. Short answer is, I think from day one, we've believed the email is the product. And so, there hasn't been as much of that, or if any of that tension of saying, no, but we actually have to use it to drive traffic here versus saying, hey, we can't compromise the value and the user experience of the core product that we have. But you know what, I'm sure that will come up as we evolve. And I'm sure that comes up for a lot of organizations. I do think you just have to really be aligned on what your kind of overall success metrics look like and what the priority is between all of them. So again, PM here saying ruthless prioritization is extremely important, and especially because it's so easy to make these quick short-term decisions for short-term benefits that in the long run can just impact the core health of a product that is very meaningful to you. And so I think again, the biggest thing is just philosophically being on the same page that it is a product and it's not a marketing channel, and if you do want to drive traffic somewhere, what is a way to do that in a way that actually fits into the kind of user experience of the product? Is it at the bottom, without getting too into the weeds, making sure it fits in without messing it up?
That was sufficient.
Thank you.
Deirdre, you mentioned early on something I think is really incredibly valuable, but often gets overlooked or not prioritized. You mentioned that you get on the phone with users to understand how they're using it. This is for the whole panel, but can y'all talk a little bit more about how actually getting on the phone and talking to real live users helps you innovate your product and help get deeper insights that you can then roll into those newsletter products?
Yeah. You want to go first?
Okay, well, I have a confession. I've never been on a phone with a user. Well, I have, but not in a situation for email specifically. But I am in the habit of, we have a special inbox where the responses to the obsession email land, and it's honestly like a pastime for me to read this because our users are hilarious. The topics are hilarious. Sometimes they'll accidentally CC us when they're forwarding it to their mom, and I love it because we get to see what they say about us, and it's the best. That's even I'm in their subconscious when I'm accidentally CC'd. But yeah, so I think that isn't unfortunately something where it's in our priority list to do. It's something that I have been doing out of curiosity. So I think that's just a happy accident. But and Courts is sort of, we're doing these things where we're getting a user advisory board together. We're thinking about what does our power users look like? When do we tap into them and when do we not? Because do we want our data to be all loyalist feedback? Because are they gonna be comfortable enough to tell us things that they don't like about us, which is actually really important. And so those are kind of small things that we're doing. They aren't these large initiatives where one person owns this question, go do this project on it. It's kind of all the PMs have these questions circulating, and when they can, try and advocate for it. That's kind of the style right now.
Yeah, I think for us, one, we do have this extreme audience obsession, and I think we believe that, so much of our entire brand is built on that. So if you lose that, you've lost the company. And, so it's just so important. I think for me, it's a lot of times just about providing context around the information that you're getting. Data can tell any story you want it to, depending on how you slice and dice it and look at it. And a lot of times what qual research, whether it's survey work, looking in inboxes, or definitely getting on the phone with the users, it's just telling you the story around some of the things that you might be seeing, or highlighting things that you might not be seeing, because data doesn't capture everything. And so from very early on, we hired an in-house insights and research team, and their entire role is to think about our audience, how it's evolving, how its engagement is evolving with our products, and providing those stories and those contexts day to day and week to week. So it's extremely important for us. We try to get on the phone with users on a week-to-week, sometimes monthly basis, and just have this sort of rolling. A lot of it is just sort of operationalizing it, I think, because a lot of times what you see in product development is it just sort of parachutes in when you want to validate something versus it being an ongoing thing. And so we have, the support team also very involved in kind of gathering constantly people who are writing in to get on the phone with us, making it a very lightweight thing to just get on the phone with people, and making it kind of part of the culture that everybody lives and breathes, not just certain teams.
This is a question for all three of you. Can you describe your current subject line strategies and how they've evolved over time?
I'll go. Our subject lines, they're fun. So it's funny. We have A/B tested subject lines. We've played around with it. Not to fully speak for the editorial team, but this is more on a personal level as a user. I think our subject lines are very fun. They are like movie quotes, song lyrics, like things to kind of almost like make you kind of hit a chord of nostalgia. And I think what they serve, and this is often what I just hear from users, is that, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and it is just like a really fun way to wake up and see something that like is like, oh my God, that was my favorite song in the 90s this morning. And it's just such a great way to just connect with our audience in that like authentic, relatable way. That is just, it's so great. We see people tweeting about them. We see them writing in being like, oh my God, that was so awesome. And it has nothing to do with the content of the email. And it's just a really fun way to wake up with them in the morning.
We think about, we know that people are waking up and reading these newsletters first thing in the morning, and just in the same way the Skim does, we send out nearly all of our newsletters are first thing in the morning, like 6 a.m. they go out. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, that's true. And so when we think about it, it's like, okay, you're scanning through what is the thing that you need to know, and so it's all editorial decision-making that goes into it, but it's usually led by a scoop in the news or what is the biggest story. And we usually will mention a couple of stories so that people can, we know people's habits, which is they read the subject lines, look at all the other emails, and then they go back and read the emails, assuming they've got no other fires burning. So you want to make sure you're not burying anything that's going to be important for them to know.
So Quartz has several emails, not all of them go out in the morning. And so the time of day is definitely a thing that we think about. We also have additions of emails, and so not everyone in the whole world is getting this email at the same exact time. And so we try our best to segment people based off of where they live, try our best to like guess what time zone to put them in, and there's segmenting for all that. But there's funny discussions, like we had an email about diapers, and we didn't want people in the UK to be like, what are these Americans doing trying to write to me? And so we changed for our Europe edition of the Obsession email that day, we changed it quickly to nappies, and we were so proud of ourselves. But we were actually like, that was actually like a really nice thing that we did, because this thing moves fast. It's like, they started writing that email in the morning, and they had 6 hours to produce it and build it, and like, it's a massive piece of work. And this is a very tiny detail that usually it's like, for the Obsession specifically, the same subject line typically goes out for every single edition in all regions of the world. And so this small detail, the fact that that was like captured in our process is kind of a miracle. So that's kind of an example. I have been recently thinking about emojis and subject lines, and I get very stressed about them because I think that the correct number is a 0 or 1 for like several reasons. But I think that we are just having so much fun on our computers and with the emojis. So, and I was convinced that this was like, everyone else must be pissed about this too. And so I ran like a ridiculous A/B test that wasn't a real test, and was trying to test the hypothesis that emojis like don't matter. And actually, we learned something different, which was that above the like the way in which you write the description, like, oh, this is the topic and these are the like descriptions, what you'd call like almost like the head of a story. The way in which we were playing with that line and doing it differently, and we realized that the way that was written is like so unimportant. It was actually the topic that was like so important, more than the day of the week, more than the time that we sent it. And so I was like, oh, interesting. I of course went in with like a whole emoji agenda, but whatever. But then we have emails like, we just launched an email called Private Key, which is reporting on cryptocurrency, and like that's like a noisy environment. And those there were, we're still finding the voice there, and I think that depending on who works on email, like that voice is going to change. How that email progresses, how the community ends up reacting is going to change how you end up writing that subject line. And we do give the editorial team like a lot of liberty there. We're not like policing subject lines and looking at performance and demanding they do something different, because we just kind of let it go, and it usually does lead to something really great. So that's the strategy right now.
Thank you, first of all. So I'm Simba with Triton. I guess we've helped companies do segmentation and personalization on web and mobile, but I'm curious, you talked a bit about segmentation on the newsletter side. I'm curious to how that fits into this strategy, how valuable it is, like how you kind of roll that out into your strategy.
Yeah, so we're definitely still evolving it. What I would say is the biggest piece is building kind of the right infrastructure to be able to build audiences and build segmentations within your list size kind of on a very agile basis. So it's not kind of like a very manual data pull. That's, I mean, analytics, that's to talk to engineering, that's to talk to whoever's putting the newsletter out the next day. And so, yeah, so we have a pretty robust set of analytics and then qual insights layer on top of that let us just pull audiences and target sections of the newsletter towards those audiences. So, for example, anything from users who have been subscribed for X period of time and who have clicked more than X times on a book link and have shown interest in this kind of genre of content is something that can be pulled in a pretty seamless way and targeted. I think that the challenge is figuring out what you want to do with it, because we actually don't believe that our core news content should be personalized at this stage, at least. Our whole value prop is saying, we are preparing you for your water cooler conversations, for what's happening in the world, and that is this kind of single filter. So we're actually very intrigued with playing around with more of kind of what happens after that. Do we deliver you personalized product recommendations or kind of link you out to other content that's more relevant to the interests that you've showed? And that's where I'm actually excited to innovate. A big step was building that infrastructure, though, because it's fun now.
Yeah.
So
It's not fun for me yet, so. We're
fun is a
doing
relative
that
word.
at the pace that we could. All right, cool.
Yeah, I'm Brian Dos Santos with the Desert Sun. It's a USA Today network paper. So I have a producer who is going to start on newsletters. And so we're going to do one for the upcoming elections. And after the elections, we have a lot of stuff going on in Riverside County over there in California. But one of the things I wanted her to think about was how to reach Latinos, because that's one of the audiences where we lack in covering and storytelling about them. And so as the Latino digital manager, how have you guys experimenting and reaching audiences that are not necessarily part of your .com audience through newsletters?
It's a great question. Well, I haven't literally done it, but if I was to embark on this, as you are, one place I would start is talking to these people and asking where are they getting their news right now, because to assume that they want it via a newsletter is a pretty big assumption. And so I would figure out where you're getting your news and ask them questions about life and figure out maybe if someone's not, maybe they're not thinking about it as I'm getting the news this way. They might be thinking about it as what information do you need in your life that you don't currently have? Finding answers to that kind of question will basically tell you what you're supposed to cover in this email.
It's interesting. There are newsletter people, and then there are not newsletter people.
Yeah, totally.
Right? The overlap that we have between our audience that is on our website and the audience in the newsletter is very small. Mm-hmm. So there are people that rely on our newsletters and they don't go to the site. And then there are people that go to the site and don't subscribe to any of our newsletters. And I find that fascinating.
Me too. I was like, what?
I was like, if you're a fan, you're a fan. And so I would think one it all. And newsletters are a single point in time, whereas your website is dynamic. But people's habits are really strong. So you want to find out if that audience that you're trying to reach is getting newsletters and interested in newsletters first before you decide to design a product just for that audience.
I love that, because I think you can't force certain user
No.
behaviors. People are going to do what they want on their phones and their computers and throughout their day. And so, and it's always going to defy your expectations, right? And so that whether it's user research, just getting on the phone with people, or actually just following somebody around, what are they doing on their phones? We've done that, actually. We actually had people log what they do on their phone throughout their day. It's fascinating. And it would be silly to say that, you can shoehorn X audience into whatever product you build. I do think an important philosophy is saying, it's not about the platform, it's just about the value that you're driving. So we like to say, we're morning routine. So if in 10 years nobody's reading an email anymore because email died, side, though I guarantee you it won't because we're still here. But if email did die in 20 years, great, we will have moved on to whatever they're doing. But then to take it back to the audience question, I think it is really understanding to Eva and Rose's points about, what information gaps do they have, at what points in time in their day and their week do they want that information delivered, and then is email the right way to deliver that? I think too often people also just jump to email as like an easy way to just shove things into somebody's inbox, and kind of going through that methodology I think is very important.
Cool.
Hi, so I'm interested in what is your selection process for figuring out what goes into your email in terms of content? And are you looking at stories that were already successful on another platform, or are these newly published stories? And are there similar elements, I guess, in the ones that are successful?
So I think like the skim probably, we lead with our newsletters. So the first place it goes in is the newsletters. So it's sort of probably the opposite of most others. So our newsletters are where you're going to see all of that content first. Some of the best of may end up on the site, so sort of the exact opposite of probably most news sites. And it's entirely editorial driven. So there's no metrics because most of it is all new. We wouldn't have, there are no metrics to put against it because they're original and they're new stories that are going into it.
Yeah, similar in that sense. And our filter is really just, we want to deliver confidence to somebody, make somebody feel like they can go about their day and feel like an informed person who can engage in conversation and just feel smart. And so that filter is what it is. It's saying, how do we make you feel prepared for that? And that, you haven't missed anything that is really important about what's happening in the world. And so we have, people call it the water cooler filter. I like to call it like the confidence filter to say, I am an informed human being. And so that's kind of the overall filter that we have.
Cool. All right, we're going to just take these last few questions, and then we're good to go.
Doug Halsey, and Council on Foreign Relations. We have, as an organization, probably in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 emails with zero centralization of how those emails go out. And so I was curious, specifically maybe for Eva and Roy, that you have multiple emails. How do you kind of avoid spamming your audience? Because I'm sure there's people subscribing to multiple emails. And is it a centralized model? And how do you just manage making sure that one person doesn't get like 17 emails at once?
Yeah, so great question. That is pretty much my job. So here is one thing that I'm learning. Just because an email is alive and you personally love it doesn't mean it cannot die. And we love our products, we invest in our products, they're our little babies. But when it no longer serves the business and it no longer serves the reader, which is like the business, it's time to analyze if that should exist. Just because you've started it and you put a lot of work into it doesn't mean it needs to stay there, because that means you've freed up people to really think about the health of those other subscriber lists. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm managing all of these emails, and they are all different. They go at different times. They have different coverage. I'm dealing with different editorial teams, and I'm the only thing that basically connects them. Even the way they're built is different. So I totally feel the decentralization, even when we only have 6 emails. And so I think that having at least one person centralizing it helps. So if you are going to treat email like a product in your company, you need to have an owner of that product. They can own other things, but there has to be one person that people know to go to, because your company is going to spend time asking everybody the same exact question. So centralizing the management of that specific emails is one really good skill. And saying no, and making the process of when a new email is created, making that an actual process and not a reaction to other political things happening in your organization. And so if you do have the owner of emails, or you as the boss of something are responsible for emails, then it is your job to be able to say no, or to say, I'm still thinking about it, because that will save you a lot of energy and time and money. And so that's something that I practice and my team practices, which is knowing when to say no, knowing when to say maybe. And because the more time you think about it, you don't want to go into this like, not confident. Like that doesn't set you up for like a good feeling when you're like, oh, we have to kill it.
They have to be distinct. So at least the way we view things is we're not going to launch a new product if it has overlap with something that exists. You might as well make the one that exists better, or make it multiple days, or like we recently took, we have Axios Future, and we made it a 5-day-a-week product as opposed to launching 5 different,
that's
different products. Because we wanted to cover more things around artificial intelligence and robotics, and sort of you could have picked 2 ways to go there, and we decided to just add to the days. That part I think is very important. You want to make sure that you don't have, if you're the user and the audience, and you're reading 4 newsletters, you want to make sure that they are distinct, and that there's a reason that you're reading each one of them. I don't know if time, like even if a lot of ours do arrive at the same time, but inbox is one where you can manage that, right? And if sort of general news is your fun part, but your healthcare is your industry and you have to read that, then you're going to come back to it and open it up.
It is 3 o'clock, so if people need to go, you may rise and leave with no shame. You guys can either talk to us in person, you can use the mic, but people, please, let's give them a minute to leave if people need somewhere to be.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.